Ulrich, Jean-Louis, I hope you don't mind to listen in for the next 10 minutes or so as Javier and I get started. Now, at last year's Vienna Migration Conference, and in the context of, let's say, widespread doubt on whether asylum reform will actually succeed, we called our EU panel, which I also had the honor of moderating, EU Migration and Asylum Reform, Are We Breaking Gridlocks? And much to our surprise, the panelists last year were rather positive about the new Pact prospect. And I think, indeed, we can say a lot of progress has been made over the last year, which inspired us to call this year's panel, or give this year's panel a much more hopeful title, I want to say, A Vision for Europe's Migration Policy Framework. So, Javier, my first question to you is, how far has the EU come since the new Pact for Migration and Asylum was proposed 3 years ago? And can we already congratulate Spain on a successful presidency around migration and asylum?
Okay, Sarah, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, I would say. Thank you very much for this invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here and attending this Vienna conference, one of the places to be, certainly, when discussing about migration. And it's also an honor to be here with well-known colleagues, Ulrich and Jean-Louis. I would say that we all have to admit that the Pact has been a success, at least from the marketing point of view. When you say Pact, everybody seems to understand what we are talking about, even if it's far to be simple. It's a very complex, and I won't go into details now, but I think that certainly there are two elements when talking about the Pact that we have to consider. First of all, is this idea of course, of being a legal instrument, so a mandatory instrument. And the second one, which I would say a more significance from the political point of view, and this is to be a compromise between member states, between institutions. We are not going to obtain everything that we would like to from the national point of view. We have to put in practice a sense of compromise. So when you ask me if you have already to congratulate the Spanish presidency, I think that it is very soon. Certainly, we are working very hard. And if you ask me what we have achieved, I think that there are two ways to respond to that question. Of course, from a very descriptive point of view, I would say that what we've done is to follow up a work that has been already going on for a long time. The presidencies that have been working before the Spanish one have already done a very good job. The French, with their progressive approach, really unblock the discussions, and then our colleagues from the Czech Republic have, and the Swedes also continued with that impetus. So to some extent, we had the engagement to follow this evolution. On the other hand, we have also to respect the roadmap that we signed with the Parliament at the end of last year. So the idea is to accelerate as much as we can to really end the negotiations during this semester. It is already done? No, I said already that. And there are a lot of, as Jean-Louis was saying in an article that he wrote in July, I think, there are a lot of legal landmines in front of us. But I think that there is a clear commitment either from the Council and the Parliament to close in a satisfactory way our negotiations. So this would be the first part of the response. But I think that when speaking about the Pact, we have also to answer another question, which is, what does the Pact mean? And I think that this Pact on Migration and Asylum is really the first and decisive step to have a genuine policy. So far, this policy has been, I think, outdated, has been incomplete. We've been given a limited response because we had rules that were devoted to asylum, to solve issues that were related, yes, to asylum and international protection, but mainly to migration. And those are phenomena that are interlinked. We've been seeing that, of course, and we know that in this room, but they're not exactly the same. And on the other hand, I would also say that all the solutions given to solidarity have been based in political will. There were not mandatory rules that would impose something that indeed is included in the treaties. So from this point of view, I think that the Pact is going to make a difference. Of course, in the internal dimension, we will have adapted rules. Rules for the general situations and rules for exceptional situations, because we have to admit that we cannot solve different situations with exactly the same provisions. And in the external dimension, I think that the Pact would mean that we can enhance an approach that is much more comprehensive and preventive. But more than all of these that I have said, I think that the Pact will certainly give a sense of unity, a message that we can achieve not the solution, but certainly a solution at the European level for this phenomenon of migration.
Thank you so much. I'd like to follow up with right away a second question, because you mentioned the sense of unity, and I think there were some challenges around that just recently also on the negotiations of the Pact. But I think what stands out even more to me is that as you are working on finding agreement on the Pact, also, let's say, others are calling that there's a crisis that is again being witnessed in Europe, because arrivals to Europe have been counted to be the highest since 2016, and especially also given that movements on the Central Mediterranean routes have doubled. And that, of course, leading to an even more disconcerting humanitarian situation, as well as overburdened reception capacities, especially in port of arrivals. I think Lampedusa was mentioned quite a few times, but also now we've heard concern from the Canary Islands, because also the Atlantic route is being frequented more over the past weeks. So my question would be, how does Spain navigate the focus on yet another crisis, while its presidency has the pressure to carry negotiations on the reform across the finishing line before the end of the year?
Well, I would start saying that we are unfortunately used to crisis. This is the first idea. So it is true that the current situation, we all know, is not an easy one. The figures are there. We have almost plus 20% in terms of irregular arrivals. We have secondary movements that are more than 300,000, I think, during the year. And we also have 800,000 requests of international protection. That represents also almost 30% increase compared to last year. However, I think that we have to admit that this is, of course, not a novelty, because migration, as we've been saying all those days, it is for sure a structural phenomenon, and that has to be managed. It cannot be avoided. It has to be managed. It's a human reality that, of course, can imply difficult situations, those deaths in the Mediterranean, but along, I would say, the whole route. Unfortunately, this does not happen only when crossing the Mediterranean. It also happens before, when crossing countries in Africa, for example. And also other elements problematic as a brain drain. But certainly we have to manage the phenomenon, to look for the opportunities. And there were a lot of references to that this morning, for example, in terms of legal pathways. So to me, the important element that we would like to certainly share during our presidency is this sense of managing. Managing has, in my view, two different meanings. First of all, we have to have a political initiative and a capacity to react. The political initiative means that, of course, we have to visit the countries of origin and transit. I think that today, Vice President Skinner and my Ministry of Interior are in Mauritania. This is, today was said as being a novelty from the side of the Commission. Well, it is not. And certainly it is not from the side of the Spanish authorities. We've been done that for almost a decade. And I think that we have also to have this capacity to react. But this would be just the first part of what managing means, in my opinion, in terms of migration. The second is anticipate. We have to anticipate with an effective and adapted policy. Our purpose is to make our colleagues in the Council to make an evolution from, I would say, a permanent crisis model, a reactive model, to a more preventive one. When there is a crisis, there is a sort of hypnotizing effect, which is something that we can understand because of the drama, because of the tragedy, because of people that are dead, because then there is a reaction in our social media, in our parliaments, of course, but we have to try to look ahead. So that's why we have proposed to the Council very recently something that has been part of the Spanish practice in the past. And this is to be preventive. What does it mean? There was a lot of references to that this morning. The Commissioner made a reference to that. Vincent also, our colleague from the Ministry of Interior in Austria. The idea of having a sense of shared responsibility. We are dealing with a common problem, and we have had, unfortunately, in the past, some maybe paternalistic approaches, and this is something that doesn't work. We need to work jointly. Second, I think that we have to build mutual trust, and this is a consequence of the first idea. The third pillar for me would be to work in the operational side, then to work in a sustained way. This is not something that has to last for a year, it has to last, I would say, for the future. And finally, and I joined some references this morning, I think that we have also to explore this parallel element that is the legal pathways. This is not just about returns, it is not just about irregular migration, it is also about having a comprehensive model. And this comprehensive model includes, for example, the legal pathways.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for this first round and for your really brilliant job at setting the scene, because you mentioned that the Pact, it might not be what we want, but it's built on compromise, and that this political will also continue to be important in the future. And also, and again, I'm not trying to summarize, just to make some highlights. I'm very happy that you mentioned so many things that we will pick up now in our conversation, including that, well, we are used to crisis, and that we cannot avoid it, but we have to try and match it accordingly with certain instruments. Now, and I think with that, it is time to ask our further panelists to join the discussion for, let's say, our own kind of reality check on what an updated EU migration and asylum policy framework would actually change in practice. And Javier, I would like to invite you to come in at any point whenever you'd like to add to the conversation. Now, Ulrich, I'd like to start out with you, because in Germany, but also in other EU member states, demands from overburdened local authorities and public administrations for solutions to domestic migration and asylum concerns have been growing. At the same time, the public debate around migration is becoming more and more heated and polarized. And in contrast to, let's say, more readily accessible populist opinions around migration, the information coming out of Brussels on EU asylum reforms is rather difficult to follow. So my question to you is, do you think the German population still understands what's happening in the EU on migration and asylum reform and what these new rules have to do with their own concerns? And related to that, will the new pact, if agreed, make a tangible difference for struggling local authorities?
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the question. So first of all, I want to come back to a point Javier just made, and I want to congratulate the Spanish presidency for the job it has done by now. I think that is very much due to your activity that we finally, on the 4th of October in COREPER, could be set the cornerstone, the final stone for the CAS with the crisis regulation. And it was not at least Germany who had some difficulties with the text, and there has been very active brokering activities from your side, from your minister, in order to achieve this goal, together with all the colleagues in Brussels, your ambassador, and so on. And that, together with the activities that the Swedish presidency did in the first half of this year, shows that the internal situation of a member state, be it the government in Sweden, which is more right-wing oriented, or a Spanish government which is after the elections and so on in a not that easy situation, does not, to my impression, not at all affect the role a member state plays in Brussels, having the presidency and brokering these agreements, which are so important for us all. So that is, it is a little bit alluding to what Vice President China said yesterday, what the European procedures and the European way of cooperating and working is still showing good results. So when it comes to the question, what does that mean for the CAS, which we have finally agreed upon now, at least in the Council? It's sure that now you mentioned it, Javier. Now it's up to the trialogue to finally come to a result. But I'm very, very optimistic that will be the something we can look at in February, March next year. We will have the text, and we will have the final pieces of legislation agreed by the Council and the Parliament as well. So what does it mean for the actual situation and the discussion within member states? So from the German perspective, I can say whatever. I can just stress what you said, Sarah, that the polarization and the importance that the irregular migration question has taken is playing, or the changes in the discussion, polarization within the German public opinion is really considerable. It has changed maybe in the last 3 to 4 months. After the summer break, we are expecting this year about 350,000 asylum seekers, which would make up about 70 to 80% increase compared to last year. That is not something which is extraordinary, simply not manageable, but nevertheless that adds to the about 1 million people from Ukraine who are still in the system, not all in the reception system, but quite a number of them, and the whole system is simply overwhelmed. And we, on the government level, together with the lender level, we are receiving nearly daily letters by mayors and by heads of county administration, Landkreise, telling us we simply cannot anymore house people. The reception system is overwhelmed. That concerns all groups, especially unaccompanied minors, for example. I just learned from Hamburg, they're about to construct tents to house unaccompanied minors still in their compound in Hamburg, but there is nothing else to be done from them for them to better house or manage the situation. And all the standards which we have on German standards as well as European standards of housing, which are very valuable and very reasonable, could simply no more be met, because the capacity is really something has come to an end. And there is we had elections in 2 Länder of Germany, which make up about 1/4 of the population last Sunday, and the migration issue has become the most important issue in the political discussion. There is still the point of inflation and the uncertainty and the economic situation. All these things are still very relevant, but migration has very much taken over more or less number one of the concerns of the population. And what there is a very broad perception that there can only be a European solution. And there is a very broad perception that the European system, the CAS, should be the solution. But what we have to face is that even after the final agreement next year, we have 2 years of implementation so that it will really show results once it entered into force, and it will take years to realize. And in addition, we have to have the necessary agreements, international agreements, which under the external dimension, which is absolutely a part of the system, which still have to be concluded. Yeah. What we are doing is on the national level. I think there are next steps that have to be expected, that we try to reduce the influx of irregular migrants to Germany with the means that we have. That is, for example, we have quite a number of programs of resettlement, very sensible, very useful. We are engaged in the European voluntary system of taking over people from the Mediterranean. We have a political agreement to accept 1,000 people a month from Afghanistan, the most vulnerable, very useful and very sensitive programs, but that is something which might be under question when it comes to the political situation in which we are, because we are overwhelmed at this moment. We have the discussion on border procedures. We have a discussion on the aspects of how to socially support migrants in Germany in order to avoid pull factors and so on. That is partly a situation which is based on facts, but that's as well, like it's always the case when it comes to migration in the public discussion, something which is partly or mainly based or partly based on symbols and on signals to the public, but as well to possible migrants. Yeah. So that is a very delicate situation in which we are now, and that adds as well, on the other hand, to the lack of qualified labor to labor. The labor situation on the labor market is really a bad one. We are lacking not only qualified but as well non-qualified workers, and so we are working on both sides. But in the public opinion, the irregular migration is very much dominating, and the other aspect is something we are, together with the Ministry of Labor and others, are very actively involved, but that's not that high on the political agenda. But there is a very strong expectance that the CAS will be a very important part for the solution.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I really thank you for giving us this really broad insight into what are the challenges in Germany, but also all the things that Germany is trying to do to really support this compromise and to really make the migration and asylum management across Europe work. Now, and I think, and to add one more thing, I think also this point that what I think is very important, that expectations will have to be managed. There will, if there is agreement on the new pact, it's not that the next day the implementation can start and solutions can be found right away, but that again there will have to be also good communication on that implementation, as you said, will probably take another couple of years. Now, I would like to now move to you, Jean-Louis, and after we looked at the situation in Germany, I would like to ask you about the situation at the EU's external borders and along migratory routes to Europe. And I would like to ask you if you think the Pact will be able to solve major concerns such as the current situation in Lampedusa, overcrowded reception centers, but also be able to address the loss of lives from capsizing ships in the Mediterranean.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the ICMPD for having invited me. First of all, I would say, being a Belgian for all my sins, I would assure you, Javier, that being in touch with the team of the incoming Belgian presidency, they are definitely your strongest supporter. Now, on your question, in the short term, you and Ulrich said it all. No, the Pact will not be the solution because it will actually not be implemented until, I would say, spring 2026 at the earliest. So there will indeed be a huge challenge in terms of expectation management because indeed, not only in Germany, but in almost all member states where migration is seen and felt as a problem, we hear very often governments and ministers say, okay, but we need a European solution. Fine, they might be, and we all hope that there will be a European solution by April next year, but it will be a solution on paper. So what's next? In the long term, that is to say 2026, I have to say that the jury is out for several reasons. First, and sorry, Hugo, you said that there were already many elephants in the room yesterday evening. I will add 2 supplementary elephants, and that's trust and solidarity. I was baffled by the fact that yesterday no one, starting with the Vice President, did not raise this issue. So the question is the Pact what we need to restore trust and solidarity between member states? They were in short supply. I have had frequent interaction during the negotiation with people involved in the negotiation, and I could refrain from remembering a sentence of the then co-facilitator of the negotiation of the Global Migration Pact, a seasoned Mexican diplomat, who told me once, as a diplomat, I was trained to build trust. But during my stay as facilitator, I had the feeling that what I was asked to do was managing distrust. So the question is, are we now at a point in time where trust and solidarity are restored? 2 member states have already given a very clear answer, and this answer is no. They are not going to play ball whatever happens, and something will have to be done with that, and we can come back on that later. But on the top of that, we have to face the truth. I beg here to disagree slightly with my friend and former colleague Monique Paria. We were recently in a panel about this. It's obvious that the mechanism, the structure that will now be put in place is utterly complex. It's more complex than what it used to be, hence the need to have 2 years to prepare the member states, to implement it. I mean, when you look at the provisions as they stand today, and I really pay tribute to those who have negotiated them, there are a lot of escape clauses in these provisions. And there is a role given to the Commission. I doubt that the institution, which was kind enough to have me on its payroll for more than 30 years, will be able to implement and follow up. So there will be huge technical challenges in the implementation of these new instruments, but on the top of that, the question will remain, will the member states play ball? There will therefore not only be an implementation challenge, but there will be also a monitoring challenge. And I would add on the top of that, I was very glad when I saw the screen after the protection session yesterday, the word accountability appearing. There's going to be a lot of EU taxpayers' money invested in that new system. I mean, the Commission has already asked, I'm not sure about the figures. People very often refer to 2 billion euro in the framework of the revision of the multi-annual financial framework. My feeling is that it's actually 1 billion for the implementation of the Pact and 1 billion for Ukraine, to be checked. But anyway, it's a huge amount of money. So the question will be, and it has to be fairly asked, it's EU taxpayers' money, is it well invested? Is it worse? I mean, is it effective? I read recently a paper that was published in Foreign Relations by 2 American economists about the way US is spending its money on migration policy. And their conclusion was that it was rather ineffective, that instead of trying to reinforce at all costs the southern border, building walls, it should be much more effective in terms of investing in countries of origin, indeed, and also investing on integration, inclusion, skilling of newly arrived migrants. I mean, it's US. US is not the EU, but at least these kind of questions should be asked. Now, one last add. I know that the time is passing, and it's about the migration route and the external relation of the EU. There was a lot said about partnerships yesterday and today, and somebody said it's most probably the concept which was the most frequently quoted during these 1 day and a half. If it is about quote, let me quote one text. We will step up engagement with partners from all regions of the world to protect and enhance the rules-based international order with the United Nations as its core, bring more fairness into the multilateral system, and prevent its further fragmentation. We will mobilize and develop our external action instrument. It is now more important than ever to cooperate on strengthening and diversifying our supply chains, fostering partnerships, trade and investment agreement, promoting sustainable development to meet our agreed goals towards net zero emission, and enhancing health emergency preparedness. This work also requires reinvigorating global trade, in which the WTO plays a fundamental role. This is the penultimate paragraph of the Granada European Council Declaration. This is the future shape of things as the EU external agenda is concerned. Either migration people do stop thinking in silo that they can sort out the migration issues by having bilateral partnership on migration-related issue and keep on failing, or they find their place in this global agenda, they find a skillful way to have migration duly taken into consideration in that global agenda, and they might reach some goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the panel, I must say. And I think with all the elephants we had in the room in this conference, we can open an elephant orphanage after this VMC. But I'd really like that you mentioned the implementation gap and also the monitoring challenge. And so the time is ticking, but I want to just give the question maybe back to you very briefly. Is EU taxpayers' money well invested on the implementation on the new pact? Do you think we're going in the right direction?
Maybe that's too early to judge now, but I think I totally agree. Finally, it's a quite complicated system of pieces of legislation, of European pieces of legislation who are directly applicable in member states as regulations, but finally it is very much up to the implementation and the way it is done and the way it is controlled and the way it is monitored and the way the Commission plays its role in observing the European legal obligations. And there are deficits now which are obvious. There are lots of things that member states wish that the Commission would, at least some of the member states would take action in certain parts where the actual acquis is not followed by member states when it comes to registration and a number of things, Eurodac and so on. But there is a strong expectancy that that will change in order to create trust between all the member states under the new system once it enters into force. And lots of preparation have to be done, a very practical one when it comes to constructing the necessary installation, the border procedure points and so on. And once it entered into force, the work really begins in order to make it practically working by the year 2026.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for mentioning the role of the Commission, because that brings me to the next round, where I would like to hear from you as really the visionaries on the future of migration and asylum policies. And I think bringing the Commission in is also interesting because, Jean-Louis, before you took up your current post, you worked for the European Commission for a very long time on migration issues. And you were involved in many negotiations on the topic. And so based on this extensive experience, but also, on your current post now, what would you say have we learned in the past 8 years of ongoing negotiations on asylum and migration reform? And is there anything that should have been done differently? And given time, if you could limit your answer to around 4 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Okay, fine. Right. No, I will not make use of the too comfortable position I am now to be an outsider, a think tanker, after having been involved in the business as Commission official, as you said it, for too many years. So, I mean, I would not enter into the, I should have done better, we should have done better, blame game. I know exactly the problems people involved in the negotiation, like you, member states, or in the Commission can meet when dealing with that. Now, I would simply say, after all, we are now confronted, and it's the last chance to find a solution, with issues that have been with us since the beginning, since the early days, since Schengen was founded. And it's, again, I'm sorry to repeat what I said earlier, about building trust and solidarity. Why have we been at pains to start to develop a common immigration and asylum policy since, okay, let's say the temporary program or the Lisbon Treaty? Because of Schengen. I mean, if we pretend that we are building an area with a common border control, it's a fake. I mean, there is no such thing as a common border. There are member states' external border which are controlled on the basis of similar criteria. And we build a space without internal border. That means that we have basically to agree on who we let in and for what reasons. So we've been struggling with that for 30 years. And indeed, at the core of that remains the issue of solidarity, which might be sorted out by the Pact as it is now in place. I said in other occasions that, okay, the Commission has put the creative imagination to its limit with the Pact. It's a bit of a complicated structure. The concept as such is right. Its implementation will be a huge challenge, but it's the last chance. It's the last chance also because, and there, if you allow me, I will try to stay with it my 4 minutes, and there I think that I will definitely ruin all chances to be reinvited to an ICMPD conference. The first sentence of the script that you kindly shared with us reads as follows: a sensitive and unfolding controversial issue, migration, will determine the future of Europe's integration process as well as crucially contribute to defining Europe's external relations. I already answered on the external relations side, but this is not true either as far as the future of Europe is concerned. And I would like to come back again to the fantastic session that we had yesterday evening with Luc and Jana, and what will happening after the December European Council. I mean, we all know the controversy. One thing is for sure is that I don't see President von der Leyen and President Michel going to the council press room at the end of the council meeting and say to the media worldwide, we are not going to open accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova. That will simply not happen. There might be strings attached, but that will happen. That means that from the next year onwards, the ball of the future of Europe will start rolling. There will be huge debate. I mean, there will be huge, the box will be open, and there are new thinking around, like, for instance, differentiated integration. If you look the Franco-German paper, the one that was drafted by experts about the future of Europe, even if there is no appetite at all about, reopening treaty now for the time being, there are new old concepts reappearing, like opt-out, for instance. That means that from next year onwards, whatever happens with the Pact, and the situation could be even worse if the Pacts fail, migration could be one of these policies where a question will be asked about the future of the very possible future of an EU migration policy. So I think that, yes, we cannot fail on the Pact for what it's worth for the time being. Yes, we have a huge implementation challenge. We can hope that this will help rebuilding trust, as I mentioned earlier. But, I mean, if we fail, we might have to draw, and I mean it, dramatic conclusions as far as the capacity of the EU to develop an own immigration and asylum policy.
Thank you so much. That was certainly 4 minutes, and a lot of information in there. Yeah, and I think the question that I'm not going to give back to you because we don't really have the time, but is really, if really everybody understands what is at stake. What is at stake with the Pact? What is at stake also with view to the future of Europe? As you said, those discussions will probably be forthcoming very soon. Now, I want to ask you, Ulrich, on a question going forward on what do you think can be done today to ensure that a purposeful migration management system is in place 10 years from now? And how can we switch from a currently dominant crisis mode to a more anticipatory approach to migration? And I think that follows up very nicely also to what Javier said in the introduction.
I think the answer is quite simple. So we have to adopt the Pact finally after the trilogue, and then we have to implement it, and we have to prepare for future migration developments. I think when you look back in what we experienced the last about 10 years ago, in 2011, the so-called Arab Spring began. In 2015-16, we had the migration from Syria, which no one really foresaw. in these huge amounts. And we had the Ukrainian situation, which is slightly different. We have the TPD imposed, which no one really foresaw. What we have I think we have long-term trends, which we can be quite certain that they will happen, that they will lead to a certain challenge for migration. Although when it comes, for example, for demographic developments in Africa, no one can predict what that means. There are different ideas on the table, but no one can really be sure. But on the other hand, we have possible risks for migration, which we cannot really predict, and we have to I think that is a lesson we have learned, and there is an internal discussion within Germany at least to better be prepared for these kinds of procedures and situations. But that's very hard to say. Shall we foresee housing facilities, for example, just in case when we have a need of housing for the general population, which has to be left empty in order to be prepared for further migration influxes? That is hardly to manage. But for example, the absolutely dire situation we now see in the Gaza Strip. We have an influx in Germany already from people from the Palestinian authorities and the Gaza Strip. No one can predict 2 million people under these very dire situations, what that would mean. And there are other risks, at least around the Mediterranean and in other parts of the world. Afghanistan, that's what we learned today. There is a need for financial contribution by the WHO and so on. Yep. So the system should be implemented for the ordinary influx, but as well we have always to be prepared for interventions in order to avoid as much as possible to avoid irregular migration from people who are in desperate need for a better living because they simply risk starvation or whatever.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for highlighting once more that we cannot really, let's say, know which crises are facing us, and we can only try and be prepared as much as possible. And for the long-term trends, I guess all we can hope for is that certain dynamics. I think 10 years ago we already knew that we would not have enough labor and that we would have a demographic issue in many countries, but it was very difficult, politically speaking, to even touch upon the issue of labor migration, especially also on the level of the European Union. So I guess coming back to also this hopeful title, one can only hope that there will be political realism prevailing, and that solutions indeed will go into that direction. Just a question, if you would like to just very briefly answer also to what Ulrich mentioned, or if you would like us to rather open to the audience.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Of course, holding an institutional role as the presidency, it's difficult to match the passion of Jean-Louis. But I can certainly agree with him and Ulrich in the fact that this is a crucial moment. We've been debating the so-called Pact for almost a decade. And I think that now it's time to act. It is time to close the negotiations for a solution that is not going to be a perfect one. And that's the sense of compromise that I mentioned at the beginning when using the word pact. But we need a solution, and we have to implement it. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure that during this implementation, we'll discover a lot of imperfections in the pact. But I would like to insist in a certain degree of and a certain sense of urgency in the need of some rules that at least for the first time covering all the different aspects of migration management, because so far it has not been the case. Today's legislation is incomplete and is outdated, and we have to renovate it and to implement it.
Thank you so much. I think I would now like to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions to our distinguished panel. So if you have a question or a comment, just as a reminder, please say your name, who you work for, and if you could keep your comment or question short, and if it's a question, if you can end it with a question mark, that would be much appreciated. Yes, right here.
Thank you very much, Jeroen van den Kerkhoven from Vetasil in Belgium. If I may add another elephant to the orphanage, if there is any room left. Imagine the whole pact is implemented in 2 years' time. It's perfectly implemented. Every member state has done their duty, etc. It still provides a solution for about a tenth of the refugees arriving in Europe. Imagine all this work being done in the implementation, all these billions being spent, and there is still not a solution for a majority of the people arriving. Secondary movements will continue. Crisis will continue to happen at the border, etc. Is there a monitoring in the system that we can quickly adapt and upscale the capabilities of the response foreseen in the Pact?
All right, I would thank you so much for your question. I would maybe see if there's one more question in the back. I will collect and then just bring it back to the panel, given that we don't have so much time left.
David Kipp of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Thank you for this very interesting round, and also I would like to ask a bit more of one of the future scenarios. You said, the historical agreement is close, and it's needed for a sense of unity, but implementation will be a big challenge. So if the EU will not take that challenge and implementation will be poor, will we rather see the end of the CIAs, as Jean-Louis, I understood that was what you were referring to, or would we see the need for another reform? And what would that reform, sorry to ask for that, the critical question, what would that reform would have to look like, or is there no chance for another reform? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there another pressing question? Yes, I see one right here. Hugo, please.
Thank you so much for the super interesting panel so far. I just wanted.
Think your microphone.
Hello?
You're closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask the panel if they might say a word about the negotiations with the European Parliament. Where are the fault lines? Is the Parliament likely to want to weaken a lot of elements that are there to bring a sense of order or control to the external border arrangements?
Thank you so much. I would now, I would like to give you questions back. So there's a question on the monitoring in the new pact. There's a question on what if it fails? What will there be a new reform underway and what will it look like? And now, of course, the negotiations with the European Parliament and what the fault lines are. Maybe if you could, maybe Javier, if you would like to start, and then Ulrich and Jean-Louis, if you would like to add.
Okay. Yes, on monitoring, yes, it is foreseen in the text, particularly in the one on management, and that is one of the pillars, I would say, of the system. On the idea of a wrong implementation and then a need to reform the system, well, let's see first if we are able to reach an agreement and we have a pact, then we implement it, and then we see what we do. As I said, we've been debating a lot, because first of all, I think that now it seems very clear that this is a European problem. But in the past, I can assure you that at least from the perspective of some member states, this was not the case, because simply migration was affecting some member states and not others. And reality has certainly changed since 2015. And some phenomenon, for example, as instrumentalization, was not even recognized until we got this situation with Belarus in 2021. So we cannot say that the negotiations has not been adapted to what we've been living, but for once we have, as I said, to have this deal done and then to implement it, and then we will see if what we have implemented is really matching reality and the reality of migration that, as we said, is changing. On Hugo's question on the Parliament, well, I have to keep some confidence on this, but what I can tell you is that from both sides, the Council and the Parliament, this sense of urgency that I referred to is certainly there. And everybody is open to make concessions. Of course, when we start the negotiations, Jean-Louis and Ulrich know that, we all start saying, well, my red lines are those and those, but I can tell you that when the negotiations progress, those red lines tend to disappear. And at least they are reduced to 1 or 2. So I think that we, from all sides, want to have a result in December. So it can be finalized during the Belgian presidency and then implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, I would like to take the question on what would be in case this next situation or a next solution in case it fails. So we just have, after nearly a decade, have concluded this in the Council. And there have been lots of voices in Brussels and around saying we would never arrive at this result. So that is really something which was not expected by all sides. And finally we did so. And I think there is no plan B. I think really that is the last chance, and what I think in case that fails in implementation, finally, what is at risk is the individual right of people to grant protection in Europe. In case we will not be able finally to implement the system and to have the public acceptance of the system, how we are managing the challenge of migration as a European Union, I think we would come finally to very different solutions, and that would not be a European one, but a member state one, and each member state will only focus on its own interests, and that is something we should absolutely avoid. So I don't see any alternative to implementing the CAS, which we will finally have next year, and then the 2 years' time, and all the procedures have to be followed.
Thank you so much. Jean-Louis.
Well, not that much to add. First of all, it's very obvious that, with all due respect, the Pact, if it is implemented, will just be one piece of the jigsaw, but it's an important piece. The second thing is that, yes, indeed, I mean, I'm not very comfortable with there is no alternative approach. Well, there could be political alternatives, but they are not feasible. For instance, as far as the so-called Dublin principle is concerned, many people, when the temporary protection was implemented, were of the view that now, look, we have there a perfect example of an alternate solution, that's to say, to let people seeking protection, losing needs of protection, go wherever they want at EU level, so they will settle where they feel comfortable. I mean, which was, by the way, the initial idea behind the common European asylum system. That is to say that the EU would be one single integrated protection space, so that, I mean, secondary movement would be limited to what is strictly linked with, I mean, cultural or linguistic bonds, for instance. That would have been an alternative that will obviously not fly politically, and therefore we are still with. And again, I mean, it's a political reality, and we have to abide to political reality, to the Dublin principle, in terms of solidarity, central solidarity or non-solidarity mechanism. Now, I mean, if this does not work, I think that what I said earlier is not theoretical doomsday. Look at what's happening nowadays. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 5 to 6 member states have restored more or less permanent control at their internal border, linked with migration control concerns. It's there already. Time and again, during the very long and difficult history of the elaboration of the Pact, we've seen some initiatives being taken on the basis of the so-called coalition of the willing. So that means that if a solution involving 27 member states, and we know already that it might end up involving only 25 member states, we might end up in a situation where, I mean, all hopes to build a common immigration and asylum policy will have to be given up.
Thank you so much. And I think this is really a good last word from all of you to wrap up, as the clock is not only ticking for EU asylum reform, but unfortunately already also for us here up on stage. I think it is very crucial, you said there's really no plan B to now really moving ahead with the new pact. I think, Jean-Louis, you also mentioned what we can learn also from elements that we've implemented and that we can also use in the future. And I think just to come back also what Javier started with, that really it's about compromise, trust and solidarity, and that we just have to have a lot of faith in that the good solutions will be found. And good luck also, especially for you and your presidency going forward, and of course for everyone else involved in the negotiations. All that remains for me to say is really to thank you. Thank you for joining me up here today. Thank you for sharing your insights, your expertise. It was a real pleasure to moderate the session today. And with that, all that remains for me is to hand over to my dear colleague Marlin, who I do not think requires further introducing, for the closing of this year's Vienna Migration Conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much.